The pieces are now cut out, and it is time to transfer the markings. There are several methods to transfer the marking, but for this purpose I'm going to show you the tailor's tack. It is just a thread and needle. You take a stitch, you leave about 2-inch tails on the stitch so that you can pull it apart and still leave threads indicating on the fabric where you have to match things. Don't pull them out as you work until you're ready to use it. In this case, I think I will even color code front ones one color and back ones the other to help keep everything organized. This is the yolks on the fold line, ready to be cut. And one more time with those yolks, this time it will be for the lining. This is some beeswax. I pull the thread through it and it helps stiffen the thread, which makes it easier to thread through needles and stronger and less tangling when you are sewing on buttons and snaps and hooks and eyes, etc. With the needle I've sewn just a single stitch through markings on the pattern. I will leave a long tail to keep the marking intact. This now has the tacks on it, and I can take the pins out, pull the pattern through. You see the tacks still stay there, and as I pull the two layers apart, I will not pull it all the way through, but rather leave about half of the thread and clip it so that I have marked on both sides of the garment. In this case, the pocket placement's now marked. The beginning of the gathering stitches and the arm's eye are marked. I've put a little clip in right at the center front and the marking again for where the gathering will stop. Use the overlock machine to finish off the top edge of the pocket before turning under the casing. Fold the pocket along the top edge as per the pattern. Because this is a curved seam, you will need to pin this about 5 times more often than you would if it were a straight seam. Then stitch, carefully removing the pins just as you get to them and trying to ease the extra fabric in. Attach a safety pin to both ends of your 6.5 piece of elastic and use the pin to feed through the casing, stopping as soon as you reach the second pin. As soon as the elastic is at the edge where one piece is, stitch across that and remove the pin. Continue pulling the elastic through the casing until you reach the other side, and again set it down and stitch and remove the pin. Stitch a 5/8 inch ease line around the entire edge of the pocket. Now fold and pin on that line. Again, there will need to be lots of pins because this is a curved edge. Now that the pockets are all prepared, let's attach them to the front of the jumper at the markings that we did earlier. There was a marking right here and a marking up here. So we will pin your pocket on the placement line. Sew the pocket in place by stitching close to the edge, but begin first by reversing and then going forward so that the top of the pocket has extra reinforcement. It is time to put the gathering stitches in between the two notches that we had. They were 2 circles. I will do that by lengthening the stitch length on my machine to the longest length and stitching 2 rows, one at about 3/8 of an inch and one just shy of 5/8 inches. With the gathering stitches in both the front and the back of the jumper, it is now time to do the side seams. There's a notch to match on each pattern piece. Because this is a straight seam, it will only need a few pins to hold it in place. As the pattern said, unless otherwise indicated, stitch with 5/8 inch seams. That's what's going to happen now. Standard 10 stitches to the inch stitch length. With the side seams now stitched and pressed open, My next step is to take it to the overlock machine to edge finish these seams. If you do not have an overlock machine, you may edge finish these either by using a zigzag on the edge or a straight stitch with the pinking shears, some way to keep the fabric from raveling. To prevent the edge from stretching, stay stitched at 1/4 inch from the edge of your armhole. Carefully pin and stitch at 3/8 inch the opened up piece of bias tape on the arm's eye. Then fold and edge stitch the bias tape to the inside. Stitch together the shoulder seams of the front and back yokes, both the outer and the facing side. This is where those pattern markings that you transferred with Tailor tacks really come into play. I've matched the squares, the circles, the notches, the center front, more notches all around as they were on the pattern. But now I also have all of this excess fabric, which is going to be gathered up with those long stitches I put in, so that everything lines up between where all those pattern markings were. Grab hold of the end and carefully pull to create the small gathers that make this excess fabric fit between where the two pins are. Secure that tail by wrapping it around one of the pins. With everything pinned into place, remove your thread Tailor tacks so that you do not sew them into the garment. Sew the yoke to the jumper at 5/8 of an inch seam and work at keeping your gathers evenly distributed. Now press the entire seam toward the yoke, even what is over the armhole, which will just have to be finished cleanly. Pin and stitch the facing to the neckline of the garment. Clip and trim in 2 stair-step layers called grading the extremely curved area from your neckline seam. Then stitch that very clipped seam, narrow seam, to the facing of your garment in what is called understitching. I varied from the pattern here. I used the serger to trim away the excess bulk between the bottom of the jumper and the yoke. I also used the serger to finish off the edge of the entire facing. This is a change from the pattern directions. Instead of turning under this whole edge, I'm having it flat on the inside. I've cut a clip here, and I'll be turning that part only up to go across and meet the little part that goes above the shoulder in the arm's eye. With the facing carefully pinned to the yoke so that there's a smooth edge, stitch around the entire circumference. There is a 1 1/4 inch hem allowance. To remove the bulk from this area, I'm going to trim a little bit of the seam allowance just in that 1 1/4 inch area, and then I will overcast the edge for the hem. And there it is, ready to be overcast along the bottom edge. Turn under your 1 1/4 inch hem allowance. Then, if you want to use the sewing machine to do a hem, you can do a blind hem by turning again and creating a little fold with a little lip where the stitching will go along for the blind hem. This is the blind hem foot. It has a special ledge on it that's going to follow along on the fold, and a place for the needle to go in on either side using the blind hem stitch. The blind hem foot is on. The fold line is lined up with the little lip. The single layer of serged edge is over here to the right. The stitch will do 3 stitches on this side, on the single, and then it will take 1 bite into the fold, then go back and do 3 stitches and one bite into the fold. Just a little pressing, and this jumper is complete.